Okay. The next one is, this is why I said the premise was important, because the next one is dependent upon this premise. So this is what I was doing for a second while you were talking. I was still listening to you. But if everything is there's no God, there's no free will.
What's the next topic? Sorry.
Let me get back to it here. The idea of God.
Okay.
Right. So if there's no free will and everything is just cause and effect, this is what I was writing here.
Okay.
So this, let me see if can you see this? See, there's two circles there.
Yeah.
Both of them with A's in them.
Yes.
Okay. So A stands for godless. We can't use A because we're going to use G for something else. So A is going to stand for atheist, but it's really godless.
Okay.
So there's a godless universe.
Yeah.
And a godless human mind.
Yeah.
Right. And it's all cause and effect.
Yes.
Right. So the cause and effect of everything up to now has just been my mind, my brain, interacting with the environment, and whatever cause and effect lights up the lightest in my brain is the one I go with.
Can I just ask you a quick question to clarify? Can I just ask you a quick question to clarify? Do you believe that animals have free will?
No, not like we do. If they have some sort of free will, it's not like ours.
Do you think plants have free will?
No.
Okay.
Free will like ours have to do with a rational mind.
Okay. So
if animals have free will, which I don't think they do, I think they're basically instinctual. Whatever lights up in their brain, the lightest is where they go. Okay. But we as humans do. So all those A's you saw in those two circles are a godless brain interacting with a godless environment.
Yeah.
And so all those A's, when put together, are going to produce what? A's. They can't produce G's. There's no G there for it to produce. Everything's an A. Yeah. Right. So these two circles. Can you see this, by the way? I don't know.
Yeah.
See,
I can.
This circle here should be. Where's my finger? This circle here. Yeah. Should be all A's, and this circle here should be all A's. Yeah. And then when they combine, there's all A's. Yeah. That's all there is in here and here. There's no G's here for God. There's no G's here for God. So G can't exist. Right? Only A's can exist. Only godlessness can exist because cause and effect, you only have what you have to work with. Yeah. You can't just make stuff up. When that pool cue hits that pool ball, if it hits dead center straight on, it's going to go straight. Yeah. To spin it, it has to hit to the side or whatever they do to spin it. But it's always going to do exactly what it's kind of programmed to do by cause and effect. Agreed. That's the way we would be. Yeah. So if everything is godless, godless brain interacting with a godless mind, there's no God there that can exist because there's no God there. It's only godlessness.
I agree.
So the very concept of God could not arise.
Okay, that's where I lose you. You fully agree that fictional stories are fiction, right? And we have a habit of writing fictional stories, right?
But we're not. And this is a mistake I think many times is made by atheists. They look to this world and they give an example from this world that they haven't shown to be a godless world, right? Yeah. This could be a God world. So you can't use those examples. What you have to do is you have to say, okay, you have to philosophically say, this is all cause and effect. Yeah. All godlessness everywhere in the human brain and in the human universe. Those two things interact. Yeah. There's only going to be godlessness because there's no other information there. And you can't create new information. When that pool cue hits that pool ball, it can't spin it if it hits it dead on. That's impossible because it's all cause and effect. So what we're saying is, in a godless cause and effect world, even the idea of God could not exist.
I disagree with that last part. So I think that, and again, I'm going to go back to the animal example, right? We talk about two things. We talk about, belief in God. And we also talk about belief in, ability to create fictional stories, right? All the other animals we see have just never displayed any belief in God. All the humans we do see have both displayed a belief in God and have displayed an ability to write fictional stories. So, which is more likely, that God, that the God that we happen to believe in is the one thing that we write that's unsubstantiated, that happens to be nonfiction, or that we made up God? Versus all the animals, right? If they lived in a godless world, if there was a God, by Gary's own logic, all the animals would act as if God was true. They'd worship God. They'd do something for God. They live lives with meaning that glorify God. But we see every other species in existence act godless. The only species that we see that don't act godless are humans, and humans we also see making up fictional stories. So it stands to reason that humans also made up God fictionally, the same way they made up every other fictional story.
Well, animals could only make up a god or worship God if they had a brain that was able to do that. At least in Christianity, we don't believe they have a brain that can do that, but we as humans do. So you didn't really deal with a premise. Premise was how in a cause and effect world, with a godless universe interacting with a godless mind, and that's all the information there is. There's no more information in the universe other than godlessness. How does the idea of God even come about? Even the idea of godlessness would not come about, because the idea of godlessness is a takeoff on the idea of God, right? You can't have godless until you have God.
The same way that in a God-full world, humans have the ability to come up with the idea of Lord of the Rings. Humans are able to make things up that are not consistent with reality. That's the whole premise of fiction writing, right? So even in a God-full world, in a world that has every, the Christian God and whatever God you want to say, right? People still will make up stories that are not true. So the same way that humans come to the idea of writing certain stories or telling certain stories, they're going to come up with an idea of God. I don't see how those things are linked.
Because in a God-full world, as you say, there's not just cause and effect, right? There's a different dynamic going on. Yeah. In a godless world, there's only cause and effect. So you can only have the information that's available to you, right? You can't create new information because you're not a creator. You're just being driven by cause and effect. So if everything is godless, you're going to be godless.
Do you understand that in certain situations, people have the tendency to be schizophrenic? Yes or no?
Oh yeah.
And see things that are not true. Do you believe, as the famous teacher once said, that if you were to go under the
what famous teacher was this?
Sam Richards. Go under the influence of mushrooms, that you were to see things that are not actually there?
And I used to do mushrooms. For you kids out there, lots of fun, but extremely self-destructive. So don't do it. Just because it's fun doesn't mean it's good. Yeah, but you're taking mushrooms. That's what it does. It messes with your brain. It puts you in a different reality. And if you're going to do it, which you shouldn't do,
things that can get humans to believe something that's not cause and effect wise, right?
But what you'd have to do is you would have to say
mushrooms cause you to hallucinate, right?
Well, in this world, right? But you haven't shown this to be a godless world, a God world. All right. So yeah, in this world, you can take mushrooms and they can mess with your brain or whatever. But in a godless world, you would still be cause and effect. You can't get away from the cause and effect, which means you can't get away from, there's only a certain amount of information there.
So you're saying in a godless world, mushrooms would make people hallucinate?
In this world, well, if they could, and I don't know that they could because we're not in that world, but if they could, it would still be cause and effect, right? You can't say mushrooms enable us to get out of cause and effect.
Yeah, I agree.
And if it's cause and effect, there's only so much information there. So if there's no God information there, whatever hallucination would be with the information that they had. You can't create information in a godless world because it's just God and effect. God and it's just cause and effect.
Yeah.
Right.
So humans have the ability to be schizophrenic, and there's causes of that. And there's causes of people hallucinating under mushrooms. So I'm saying well within the idea of cause and effect.
Because you still only have A's.
Yeah.
So you can as far as a mushroom showing you God somehow, you can't, because there's no G there. You would just mix up the A's. You'd mix up whatever information is there, but you can't create new information because it's just cause and effect. Hitting the pool ball with a pool cue and straight on, it can't do anything but go straight because it's cause and effect.
I'll use the example from your debate, right? The famous Sam Richards said, I was an atheist and I did mushrooms and I found God that way. So, even in a godless world, you can use mushrooms to find God.
No, I think he admitted there that, well, he goes back and forth. I think at that moment he admitted that there was a God. Right?
Yeah, but it was because of the mushrooms, right? So it was clearly not accurate.
But yeah, clearly. But philosophically, that doesn't work, right? You have to stay with a philosophical premise of cause and effect. If you go out, if you go into this world, well, maybe this world is a God world, and so it doesn't work by cause and effect. So any example you use may not be true to the cause and effect of an atheistic world. So we're in this imaginary atheistic world, or an imaginary God world, whichever one we're going to be in. But in this imaginary atheistic world, it's all cause and effect. So since there's only a limited amount of information, that information can only get mixed around, right? It can't come up with new information because it's cause and effect.
So the way the human mind works, right, is it works like, first of all, it's hard to understand, right? But the human mind is of course a very complicated thing, right? What we perceive as reality is not necessarily reality, right? We hope it is, right? Of course, if you're under the influence of mushrooms, it's not, right? But it's like if you're perceiving reality in a certain way and you happen to be schizophrenic, you're going to perceive it in a way that's not consistent with actual reality. Are you saying that in a godless world that people would only perceive reality, they would never perceive fiction?
No, I don't even think in a godless world you can know for sure you are perceiving reality, because you're assuming that the cause and effect from the Big Bang today has enabled your brain to accurately
and I agree with that.
See the world around you. So no, I would say in a godless world, you can't possibly know you're seeing reality correctly.
Okay.
What I'm saying is, if there's no God in information in the universe, you can't create new information.
I'm not creating new information. I'm making it up. That's not the same as creating.
That's great. Yeah, it is. Because in a godless universe, there's not the concept of God. It can't exist.
So
in a godless universe.
Here's a better question. If somebody's under the influence of mushrooms, right? Are you saying that there's no, it's not a direct cause and effect relationship between going on mushrooms and then seeing whatever the spirit world, whatever he said he saw, right? You don't think you can look at the cause and effect of that from the drug?
Certainly that can be a part of it, but and maybe it's the whole part, but when you add into that you have a soul that's affected by that too, that's not affected by the cause and effect of the world, then that throws another bit of quote information in there that's kind of a wild card, right? So it's not just cause and effect. So anyhow, I don't know if we're done with that one or not. We got a couple more to go through here.
Okay, sure.
This one is our propensity to desire to live forever.
Okay.
So that makes sense if you've been created by God. So what we do is we're alive. We're human beings. We're alive. We think, most of us think death is like not good, right? Because we want to continue to live, right? So we see death as an intrusion on what we believe should be an eternal life. And virtually every religion has some manner of that eternal life. And we have always believed, humans have always believed in all of these, right? Believed in God.
For the most part, I would say.
Including a lot of them forever. So that's very well explained by Christianity. Christianity says we were created to live forever. And then we sinned. We brought mortality upon ourselves. It is an intrusion into our lives, and it shouldn't be there. And that's why Jesus came. At least one of the main reasons he came, to write that, amongst other things, and allow us to live forever. Now, in a godless universe, everything is mortal. So the universe is mortal. It'll cease to exist one day. The world is mortal. It'll probably cease to exist, or whatever can break down will break down. We are all mortal. We will all cease to exist. That's our nature. That's our being.
Agreed.
We don't have in us this idea that we should live forever.
Sure. Now
you can say we like life and we want to live forever, and that's true in this world. But in an atheistic world where everything is mortal, it should be our nature to say, okay, we're mortal. That's the way it is.
Yeah.
We might not even, especially in a cause and effect brain and environment thing, we might not even come up with the idea of eternity because it's not in that information. But what we see is virtually everybody believes there's some manner of eternal life, which is very consistent with a God, especially the Christian God, who's the real God, not consistent at all with a godless universe.
So before I respond to that, do you believe that, again, I'm going to ask this every time, do you believe that animals have eternal life?
Well, let's put it this way. I don't see any evidence for that.
Okay.
Some would say maybe, but if they do, it's only because God has kept them alive. And God has decided that. But I think, and Matt, maybe you can jump in here. I think most of the church fathers say no, they don't. But do you know any different, Matt?
I don't know any different, no.
Okay. So let's just say, for sake of argument,
No.
We'll go with my understanding now.
So you have another example of this where every other species has death. Every single other species that ever exists in this world, again, 75% of animals are insects. Every single one of these species has death. But Gary is telling us that human beings are the only exception to the rule that suddenly doesn't have death, that every other species has death except for human beings.
Because we're the only. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, because we're the only ones created in the image of God. Right?
Okay.
We were created from Christian belief. We were created in the image and likeness of God. So we were created to be eternal by God. The animals weren't created in the image of God. They weren't created with the ability to become like God. So they were created in a different way for a different purpose.
But we see animals dying. We see plants dying. We see
people
mammals, reptiles, amphibians. We have almost identical ways and methods of dying. Decapitation, right? As an example, right? The way that animals die and the way that humans die are very, very similar.
Right.
Yet we're supposed to believe that only one of these two things is actually death and one of them is not death. That seems a little bit far-fetched to me.
No, our bodies truly die.
Okay.
Jesus's body truly died. He rose it from the dead because he's God. His divine nature can't die. So he rose it from the dead, and he can raise us from the dead, right? But that's because we're in the image of God. God is an eternal being, and we were created to be like him. One of the ways we were created to be like him was to be eternal. We're the only species of animals, if you want to put it that way, that was created in the image and likeness of God. No other one was.
Yeah. Well, again,
so we are the grand exception. You're right. We are the grand exception to all of this because we were made differently than the animals.
Okay. I mean, I guess, yeah, there's a lot of underlying assumptions there. I know that we have time today to discuss all of those things, right? But, the way that I see, the situation, I see humans and animals sharing so much DNA. Again, I also do believe that in evolution. So I think humans evolved from animals, right? I see so many similarities between humans and animals, overwhelmingly, that it makes sense that, again, which do you think is more likely, that we're somehow completely different than animals? Or possibly, do you think it's more likely that the one species that claimed that man was, that his species is made in the image of God is also the species that came up with God? Which do you think is more likely?
Well, obviously, I think the one I believe is more likely. But what was I going to say? Oh, I lost my train of thought. Oh, you believe that we as humans evolved up the scale, basically, and we are who we are now. We came from chimps and whatever we came from down the line. We believe we fell back to this animal state, that we had we were material, but much more subtle materiality. Jesus, when he rose his body from the dead and it was no longer a fallen body, he could just appear and disappear. He could walk through, he could, appear in a closed room, right? It's still material, but it's a very subtle materiality, kind of like the angels, right? When we fell back to the very gross materiality of the animals. So I can understand the confusion if you don't understand the Christian anthropology. But nonetheless, it is still possible, just as you could say it's conceivably possible that we just evolved in a godless universe and we're just like the animals. It's also possible that we were created by God and fell back to the state that we're in, and God is going to raise us back up to the state he originally created us. And both of those are possible. The question is which one is true.
Yeah. I guess it is. I'm not denying that it's possible. It just, from the way, look at all the evidence, right? You can talk about evolution. I probably don't have time for that, right? But you look at all of the evidence, right, for evolution. You look at all of the evidence for, again, similar genetics. You can even look at like the way that we test for like diseases and stuff like that, right? That we do animal testing for disease, right? The fact that humans are also mammals, right? We're closer to, we're mammals, right, as opposed to reptiles, right? So that means we're closer to monkeys and dogs and cats than they are to lizards, right? So to say that humans are somehow the exception to the rule, the one thing in nature that we see that plays by completely different rules, where everything is just thrown out. Now Gary will talk about the fact that free will, and we can all say this is wrong, right? This is a bad decision, this is a bad thing to do, right? We have pets, we treat pets the same way. We say when a pet does something bad, we say this is a bad thing, this is acting bad. We say it's a bad dog or a bad cat, or a good cat and a good dog. We clearly do this with animals. We clearly assign free will to the animals, and we judge their action. So it's in human nature not just to judge the free will of humans, but also to judge the free will of animals, to assign our morality to the animals. So Gary will say that by Gary's own logic, the animals must have free will, but he won't say that.
No, what I said is that if they do, it's not like ours, because it doesn't come from a rational perspective, which means they probably don't. What they are is that they have some manner of intelligence. So yes, we can use good and bad because that's how we speak. We don't put the fox up on trial for raiding the chicken pen, right? The chicken coop, because it doesn't know any better. It couldn't possibly know that was morally wrong, right?
Is it
and we
morally
don't hold
wrong?
it to that state. Well, it'd be wrong for a human, right? But we don't hold.
Is it wrong for a human to eat a cow?
Just a second.
Yeah.
Not under Christianity, no. But animals, we don't hold them to a moral standard because they don't have a rational mind. And you need that rational mind for free will. You need that rational mind to understand right and wrong, right? They go by instinct. I'm hungry, here's food, right? They're not thinking this is somebody else's chicken, right? They're just thinking I'm hungry, this is food. So we don't hold them to that standard. When we say to the dog, bad dog, most people aren't thinking he did something morally wrong. We're not even thinking he can understand our words. We could say good dog, but we say it in a certain tone of voice. It's still going to have the same reaction because it's going to understand that emotion or whatever it understands, or whatever it perceives, right? So we're saying, yes, we have physical bodies, material bodies like the animals do. Church fathers are very clear in that because of our fallen nature, we're like them. But we have a soul that's rational, and a soul that can be brought into the image and likeness of God. And that's the difference. And you believe we're just a body, so you don't see that difference. Well, again, it depends on which one is right. I'm agreeing with you that yes, we are physical beings, and we have many physical attributes in tandem with the animals. But what we're disagreeing with is that we have a rational soul created in the image and likeness of God. They have an irrational soul that wasn't created in the image and likeness of God.
But if again, like the way that they act, right? Humans all the time. It's not just me. If we're looking at human behavior and tracing it to what reality is, that's your game you want to play, right? People all the time say, "Oh, my dog loves me. My cat loves me." They'll say all these things. So they'll say their animals are capable of love,
but not on the same level.
That would mean free will if you're going to go that direction.
Not on the same level. I mean, there's a huge difference between coming home, if we had a dog, which we don't. But if we had a dog and I came home and the dog jumped all over me and looked at my face, or whatever dogs do. So a huge difference between that and my wife coming, right? Yeah. And hugging me and giving me a kiss, right?
But there's people don't differentiate between that in our culture, in our society.
There's all sorts of weird people out there, but there's a huge difference.
Normal. This is most people, right?
Well, there's lots of weird people out there.
But that's how you're defining how reality works, right?
That dog doesn't have a rational mind. It's not making as high of a choice of love. It's just doing what dogs are wound up to do. And you have to greatly abuse that dog to make it not do that. But the human being is making a higher choice. Human being is making a rational choice, not an irrational choice. Human being isn't just, from a Christian perspective, isn't just wound up to do certain actions. We make rational decisions, and that makes our love at a higher level than the dog's love. And most people, I think you're wrong about this, by the way. Most people do know the difference between the dog love and the human love.
And they prefer the dog's love if you talk to most people.
If they do, it's only because it's easier, right? The dog's always going to lick its face,
right? And
the wife might not kiss them and hug them.
That's I think part of the thing is your whole thesis is based on the fact that human experience is necessarily true and correct. And if you're going to go by that logic, then human experience will tell you that how the way a dog behaves is moral or immoral.
No, my whole thesis here is that in every one of these things that we've been over,
Yes.
man has always believed objective morals, life has meaning, free will, idea of God, desire to be able to live forever, and so on. And we've got one or two more to do.
Yeah.
But that all those things can only exist if God exists, and that's how we act as humanity. Right?
Yeah.
There's always can be exceptions, right?
Yeah.
But as a rule, the exceptions prove the rule. There can't be exceptions without a rule. Right? So as a rule, this is how man acts. And these things can only exist if there's a God. And what the atheist has to do is say, man, to best get along in a godless world, has to act as if there's a God.
Yes.
And I think that's illogical, and you think that's logical, and that's where the difference is.
Yeah.
All right. You want to go on to the next one, or you have something more?
Let's go to the next one.
All right. Now this one's might take a little bit more longer to kind of play out, and I don't want to get into the weeds in it, which I sometimes do with atheists, but we can go with it as long as you want. But the only thing now, evidence is what we see, what we experience,
sure.
Right? And that's all evidence is. All that we've ever experienced is life comes from life, right? You've never actually seen or experienced life coming from non-life.
Okay.
So just at this, I'm not saying that might not change in the future, right? In the future, maybe we'll see life coming from non-life.
Yes.
But for now, where the evidence sits right now, we've only seen life coming from life. So if we were going to draw a conclusion based on the evidence we have right now, just got distracted. Somebody walked behind you, I got distracted. If you're going to make a conclusion based on the evidence we have right now, we've only ever seen life coming from life, and we'd ask, where did the first life in the world, material life in the world, come from?
Yeah.
Well, it can't be another material life, because then it wouldn't be the first. We have no evidence to this point that it can come from non-life. So just following the evidence, the first material life had to come from an immaterial being. So that's the only other alternative. Now, that's just following the evidence we have to date.
Okay.
I know atheists have great faith that one day we'll see life coming from non-life, but just the evidence we have to date, that's the natural conclusion.
Okay, so this is the question I thought about actually. So what I'll say about this before talking about faith, right? I'm going to ask you this before we even get into the discussion. One more time, I've done this a lot. How do you define life?
I'll define it any way the scientists want to define it. It takes in nutrients, reproduces its cells. I'll accept the scientific definition.
Okay, fine. Right? All the 8 characteristics, right? And I'll talk about this a little bit in a second with the virus, but before I even get into the virus, does God take in nutrients?
We're talking material life, right? Not talking.
No, I didn't say material. I just said life. I didn't say material.
All right. I assumed, being an atheist, you meant material life.
No, okay. I am an atheist. That's how I define life. How do you define life? That's why I asked.
Well, I can't define immaterial life because I haven't dissected God. But I define material life, which is all we can dissect and look at and so on, as all those 8 characteristics.
So what you're doing, and this is I think a little semantic trick, right? You're saying all material life came from other material life. So where did the first material life came from? Well, it's like, well, it can't come from material life. Where does it come from? You just made it up, immaterial life. Well, you can't just say that. That's
no. What I said is that we've never seen life coming from non-life. That's the first premise. We've never seen life coming from.
Well, how are you defining life in this situation? And that's what I have a problem with.
However, the scientists want to define it for material life. That's how we'll define it.
Okay.
So we've only seen, but we haven't seen life coming from non-life. The only thing we've ever actually seen is life coming from life. So just based on that evidence that life, from all we've seen, life always comes from life. And we ask, where did the first life in the world come from? Meaning the first material life come from? Well, it couldn't have come from another material life, or wouldn't be the first.
I agree with
There's only one alternative that anybody knows of. And that's an immaterial life. It's the only alternative, right? So the evidence points to the first material life in the universe or in the world, wherever life is, coming from an immaterial life.
Okay. So let's look at our observations, right? And what he's doing is he's conflating life and material life. And he's done this a few times now. if material life is how the scientists define it, fine. I'm willing to use that. I'm willing to use the 8 definitions, right? But you haven't defined just regular life. So you have to tell me what this immaterial life and this material life have in common.
Look, we've only seen humans coming from humans. We've only seen muskrats coming from muskrats. We've only seen amoebas coming from amoebas. You know, we've never seen something that doesn't have life, like dirt or something, or whatever it is that you say doesn't have life, doesn't meet that criteria. We've never seen life that meets that criteria coming from life, coming from non-life. Right.
Okay. I agree with that premise. That part I agree with, right? But what he's trying to do is a solution, right? So we know at some point, we can both agree that at some point, the first material life had to come from something that's not material life. You agree with that, right?
Okay. Surprised you do.
The first material life, I mean, otherwise it wouldn't be the first. You said that, right? The first material life.
So the first material life had to come from something that's other than material life, right?
Correct.
Right.
Everyone agrees with that in the world, right? Because otherwise it wouldn't be the first. That's just the definition of the word first. Right. So the question is, and this is an interesting question, and we can decide if it's true or not. Everything we've seen throughout history was material life coming from other material life. Now we have to say, okay, how did the first one come about? It couldn't have come from material life, or it wouldn't be the first. Everyone agrees with that. So the question is, did it come from material non-life, or did it come from non-material life? Right? Life that's non-material, or material that's not life.
Right.
Now, the way that I look at it, since we've seen neither of these two options ever, we haven't seen either of these two options, I'm more likely to inclined to believe that the first life came from material that's not life, because I've at least seen dirt, I've seen rocks, I've seen whatever, than to believe that it came from something that's immaterial. That's even more far-fetched to me than just believing that it came from something that's material but not life.
But
so the fact that the first
but the immaterial meets the criteria, which is life coming from life.
It's not material life.
No, because it meets the criteria of life coming from life.
Well, how you no. How are you defining life? You haven't defined life. You define life from material, from 8 characteristics.
Right. Okay. That was for that part of it. But now we're going to say, where did the first material life come from?
Okay.
When you say it came from non-life, that's a total something other, right?
Sure.
When I say it came from an immaterial life, of course we haven't seen it. That's what we're trying to find out. Where does the evidence of the world point to?
So you're saying it comes from immaterial life. I don't know what life means, because you've only defined life as material life.
But yeah, we might not be able to define immaterial life, but what the two things have in common is that they're both life.
Well, what is life?
Wait a second. Yeah. Whether we can define immaterial life or not is not the point right here. The point is that if it exists, it's still life, right? So life is still coming from life here, right? You're still consistent with all the evidence we've seen. What we're doing is we're looking at the material world and seeing and trying to discern, does it point to the immaterial world or not? And I would say in this case it does, because it's consistent. Life is still coming from life. Yes, it's a different type of life. It would have to be, because it couldn't come from another material life, as you said. So it would have to be a different type of life. Whether we haven't dissected that life, so we can't define it, but we do. But it is something we have in our consciousness, immaterial life. Whether you actually believe in it or not, we know we have it in our lexicon. It's the only thing that meets the criteria of life coming from life.
I'm going to use a little bit of an analogy here. Are you familiar with Matt Walsh?
Yeah.
By any chance? Okay, so Matt Walsh had this famous documentary, or this famous quote, really, and he said, "What is a woman?" Right? Because I'm going to just use an analogy. I'll get back to the topic at hand in a second, right? And he said there was people defining, trans women as, trans women are women, right? And they're saying that therefore it's a woman. And he asked the question, "What is a woman?" Right? And then people will be like, "Oh, it's a biological female or whatever," right? Well, and so why is a trans woman a woman? Say because they identify as one, right? Well, you just define life as a set of 8 characteristics, including taking in nutrients, right? That's as an example of one. That's the way you define life, in the same way that I guess Matt Walsh would define the word biological female, right? Based on chromosomes or whatever. And then you're saying something else that does not meet any of the criteria of life is counting as an immaterial life, and you're saying that, well, at least they're both life. Well, how are you defining the word life? Not to sound too much like Matt Walsh, what is life?
Because we can only define material life, right?
Okay.
Because we've been able to look at it and hold it and dissect it and see it.
Okay.
We have the understanding, most of us, that even you have the understanding of the concept of immaterial life. We can't dissect it. We can't say this is what it's made of, right? But we do know that it's life that's not material.
I don't know what immaterial life and material
Means
life have any in common. What does they have in common?
It's life that's not material. But what the common is, life is still coming from life.
You're using the word in the definition.
If our only evidence is life comes from life,
yeah,
right? And the first material life couldn't come from another material life, but still we only know life coming from life, then yes, we have to jump to another form of life in order to maintain the consistency that life comes from life.
But you haven't defined what life is.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to define what immaterial life is. It's the only way to stay consistent with the idea that life comes from life. When you say, oh, the first material life came from immaterial life, that's not consistent with everything we've ever seen. We've never seen that happen.
And it's also not consistent to say that
it's consistent in the sense that life
is
still coming from life.
Coming from material, right? We've only ever seen material coming from material.
Right.
Ever.
But when you ask right. But it's a necessary step, because when you say that where the first material life come from, and you've admitted it can't come from another material life.
I agree with that, of course.
And you also admit we've only seen life coming from life. So
I have said we've
never seen life coming from
material life. What you're doing is a semantic trick. You haven't defined the word life, and that's what I think the problem is. That's why I'm not agreeing with you. If you define life, then we can have what is this overwhelming term? If they say this life, and that there's two categories of life, material life versus immaterial life. What is the overwhelming definition of the word life?
Again, we can't define immaterial life because we can't dissect it.
I'm asking you to define the word life, not immaterial. Right. I'm talking just overall life. What is overall life?
In this way, we can say it's not something. It's not non-life, right? You're
using the word in the definition.
It doesn't matter because you're trying to define something that can't be defined in the way you want it to be defined. And I'm not trying, and I'll admit I can't define the immaterial, right?
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, if we're going to be consistent with everything we've ever seen, that life has never come from non-life ever, right? And so we have to say, well, how can the first material life come from another life? Because that's all we've ever seen. But even though we can't define the immaterial, it's still the only option. There's no other option that's consistent with life coming from life.
Well, that's
whether you can define it or not, it's still only the thing that's consistent. When you go to the first material life came from an immaterial life, that's not that came from a non-life, material non-life. That's not consistent with everything we've ever seen.
So let's just take out let's use the definition of the word life, and if you don't like the definition, then we can get rid of it, right? The definition of life, let's take it out. Let's not use it. Let's say there's the 8 traits. There's 8 traits, right? Taking nutrients, I'm going to use that as a substitute for all of them, right? We've only ever seen things that take in nutrients come from other things that take in nutrients. So the first thing that takes in nutrients has to come from something that doesn't take in nutrients just by definition. Right. So whether that's dirt or God, it's the same principle.
Well, it has to be either one. Right? Yes, it has to either be non-life or life.
But I don't know how you can't explain how God is life. It doesn't meet any of the criteria of life.
It can't, because it's a different type of life. I'm not trying to say that it meets the criteria of material life. What I'm saying is you have these two options. The first material life could have come from something immaterial or something non-life.
Yes.
Or it could come from another life. Right. Yeah. So if everything we've ever seen is that life comes from life, even if we can't define immaterial life, it's still life.
Why is it still life? What does it have in common with life?
It's because it's a spiritual life. We would say it's the source of all life. It is what life. It's the energy of life, right?
You're using the word in the definition.
Just because it doesn't matter. Just because we can't define it, because nobody's ever actually dissected it, doesn't mean it's inconsistent with the idea that life has to come from life. It's the only alternative other than life coming from non-life, which at least we've seen, if we can't define the immaterial, at least we've seen life coming from life.
What I'm
right?
saying is when you make a definition,
We've never seen
you
life
have
coming
to
from
have,
non-life.
you cannot use the word in the definition. That's just that's how
we're not-
you have, that's simple logic. That was
Right.
exactly from the movie, right? What is a woman, right?
Right. We're not getting anywhere in this. Let's go to the next one. It's similar. And we're probably going to get bogged down in the same thing, which you're going to say, what is intelligence? But we've never seen intelligent life coming from non-intelligent life. Every time we've seen intelligent life coming into existence, it's come from intelligent life. So if we're going to be consistent with that, we say where the first material intelligent life come from. Again, you have two possibilities: non-intelligent life, which we've never actually seen, or immaterial intelligent life, which we've never seen, and we can't define it exactly, but at least it's intelligent life, right? So it's at least consistent on that. And before we get bogged down, let's go to the last one. I'll tell you where I'm going with this. We've never seen self-aware life coming from non-self-aware life. We've only seen self-aware life coming from self-aware life, material life, right? So if we say, where did the first self-aware material life come from?
Yeah.
There's no evidence that it can come from a non-self-aware material life, material non-life, right? Or even material life. So the only other option to keep consistent with self-awareness coming from with self-awareness, even if we can't properly define it, is it came from an immaterial self-aware life. So where this actually leads to is that the first intelligent, self-aware life is immaterial. And all material, self-aware, intelligent life came from it. Until we can see any of these things coming from the immaterial, not the immaterial, from non-life, then the only thing, whether we can define it or not, I might not be able to find a woman, but I know one when I see one, right? So I might not be able to define immaterial, but I know it when I experience it, and I've experienced it. So, and even if you haven't experienced it, it's in our lexicon, right? Just because, now maybe there's some philosophy out there that thinks you can define what an immaterial life is, and you can look it up when this is over. But nonetheless, we talk about it. It's part of our lexicon. It's part of this whole thing has been about, is there an immaterial life or not?
Yeah. Can
you properly define God in his essence? We would say, no, you can't. That doesn't mean we don't believe God has an essence. It just means we as humans are not intelligent enough, nor do we have enough experience to be able to define it. All right. I don't have the experience to define immaterial life, but we can talk about immaterial life. It's a spiritual life. It's a non-material life, right? Even if we can't define it. It's the only thing that is consistent with life coming from life, intelligence coming from intelligence, and self-awareness coming from self-awareness. And if your argument is you can't define the immaterial, okay, if you think that that totally overthrows everything, I would say no, it doesn't, because your alternative is something that nobody's even conceived of. I mean, you can conceive of it, but yeah, we have to go to the immaterial, self-aware, intelligent life. That's more consistent than going to the non-life, non-intelligence, non-self-awareness, because nobody's even. I mean, that isn't even in any of our experiences. So we're looking at evidence in this world and saying, does it point to out of this world? Does it point to something other than this world? And if it does, then by definition, we won't be able to define that, right? But that doesn't mean it doesn't point to it.
So, yeah, I mean, you already predicted my
I might not be able to define a woman, but that doesn't mean, I can't, know that my wife is a woman. I might not be able to.
How do you know that?
The famous Supreme Court, decision. I can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it. Is proper because we can experience things and we can know things we can't necessarily always define with precision. Don't scientists talk about things we've never even seen before? And we certainly can't know what they're made of because we haven't seen them, we haven't dissected them. They see the effect of them, right? And so they say they exist. Well, this is the same thing here. What I'm trying to say is we see the effect of God in all these things. We might not be able to define his nature, just like we can't define the nature of some particle we've never been able to dissect. We can just guess and suppose, but we don't know. That doesn't mean it's not there. That doesn't mean we can't talk about it.
So just to be clear, like, and if you look, did you watch the movie that I'm referring to?
Yeah, very good movie.
Oh, okay. At the end of the movie, what happened? His wife did give a definition that was.
Well, she said it's an adult female. She didn't define female. She said it's an adult female. Now, please open this.
A female is a biological term, right?
Right. But
and like it means certain chromosomes or whatever. There's a certain characteristics of that, right? It's the same situation with the word life, right? There's that's a material being that we can see and we can dissect, so to speak. Yeah.
But some of these very small particles that they say exist, we can't do that with. We simply see the effect of them and we guess what they're made of, but we don't know. So if we can do that with material things, certainly it's proper to do it in a philosophical discussion with an immaterial being, even though we can't define exactly what this immaterial being is made of. We can say spiritual, whether we can, and say it's non-material. But even if somebody like me can't define it any more than that, we still know what I'm talking about. And to say that you can't define it anymore, even if I can't define a woman any more than I know what one looks like, I still know what a woman is, right? Even though I can't define these very small particles, other than the effect that they're showing me, I still know that they're there. The scientists do, and just the same thing. Just because we can't define the material doesn't mean that these things don't point to it.
So what I'm trying to say is that if you in no situation, right? This is something that he talked about in the movie. That was he willing to accept the circular definition of using the word in the definition? That has nothing to do with God or spirituality. That's just how that's just a semantics thing, right?
You're right. That was my inability to define immaterial.
So but
that doesn't
immaterial. I didn't ask you to define immaterial. I asked you to define life, and now I'll ask you to define intelligent life, right?
Well, but you're asking me to define immaterial life, right?
No. I'm not asking you to define immaterial life. I'm asking you to define the word life.
No, but there's a difference. We've defined a material life.
We
can't define as immaterial life, right? Yeah. Because we don't know what the immaterial is made up or immaterial life is made up of. So what's the difference? This is what you haven't answered yet.
Yeah.
What's the difference between us not being able to define that and not be able to define what these very small particles are made of, but still know that they're there and still can talk about them and still can use them in a sentence?
Just to be clear, right? When you talk, let's talk about neutrinos for a second, right? That's a very small particle you can't observe. How do you observe it, right? You look at the ice cube, right? And you see its interaction with matter, and you see like how the matter interacts after the neutrinos have passed through it, right? But you can give a very clear and precise definition of neutrinos. You can talk about their mass. You can talk about their left or right-handedness, right? You can talk about their spin, right? You can talk.
So are you saying every particle that we believe exists
has a
we can
clear
define
definition
without precision?
Has a clear definition,
and we can't be wrong.
No, I'm not saying that you could be wrong. I'm not telling you it's right.
It's a guess.
But as a clear definition, that's my point.
Right. It's a guess. It's a definition, but it's a guess, and that's something material that we can experience in the material world. Right. And you're saying we can't talk about the immaterial because we can't define it. But we can't, with precision and knowing we're right, define these things either. But we can talk about it, we can guess. We can't actually know for sure that we're right. What I'm saying is, in a philosophical discussion, you can talk about the immaterial without being able to make a precise definition of it. And it happens all the time in philosophical discussions. I think the reason that you're doing this is because you know that this points to that and you don't want to go there. So you bog down on this. Well, you can't give me a precise definition, instead of saying, okay, we can talk about immaterial life. Everybody does. Philosophers do. Religious people do. Even atheists do. So does this point more to an immaterial life or to a material life? And say, well, I'm not going to make that decision because I don't think you can define the immaterial.
No,
it's an obfuscation.
What I'm saying is, like, when it comes to, and again, what I look at, right? Whether start with neutrinos, right? I have a very, very specific thing, and I say this phenomenon, and not me, but like scientists, right? This phenomenon points to neutrinos that have this mass, this spin, this weak force, this left-handedness, all of these properties of a neutrino, and they'll say this is how the neutrino interacts with matter. This is where it fits in the standard model. They'll have all of these traits of the neutrino, and they'll have it laid out. They'll have a very clear definition. Now, you can say that's right or wrong. We can have a conversation about how accurate that is, but they have a very clear and precise definition of that. What you have for life is you're saying immaterial life. I don't know what that means. I don't know what life means.
You do, because you don't need a direct definition. A philosopher doesn't know exactly what it is. A religious person doesn't know exactly what
It doesn't
it is.
meet any of the
Atheists don't-
criteria of life.
I've had discussions with atheists about this, and we don't get bogged down in, you can't define with precision what immaterial life is, because the question is, does it point there or doesn't it point there, right? We know the concept, all right? Yes, it should be a given that we can't precisely define it because it's immaterial, but we have the concept. Now, the question is, does life coming from life and intelligence coming from intelligence and self-awareness coming from self-awareness point more towards that, or more towards coming from non-life and non-intelligence and non-self-awareness? To say that we can't precisely define a word that philosophers and religious people and atheists use all the time, it's just to say that you don't want to answer the question.
No. I'm saying it points, I would say it points to the latter, it points to other material things. And this is the reason I would say that, right? Because we've seen evidence of material life existing. We've seen dirt, we've seen rocks. I'm not saying that's what caused life, but we've seen it, right? We have a very clear definition of dirt or rocks or all this other stuff. And I can say, you can say that's wrong, right? But I can say, and I can come up with a model, right? And this dirt becomes a bacteria. Viruses are not considered life, but I could see theoretically some kind of process that would make a virus turn into a bacteria, as opposed to what you're suggesting, which is that some arbitrary thing, whatever you want to call it, whatever name you want to call it, that has none of the criteria, zero of the criteria of material life, thus to me has nothing in common with it.
That's a necessity. It's a necessity because it didn't come from another material life. It has to be something different than that.
If that's the case, right? What do material life and material non-life have in common? They at least are material.
How in a cause and effect universe, when you only have a certain amount of information available, do you go from non-life to life? The information isn't there to do it, right? There has to be something from the outside to do it. Because otherwise it wouldn't be cause and effect. The pool cue is hitting the pool ball straight on and it's going up in the air. If there's only non-life, that's all you're ever going to have, because that's all the information you have to work with.
So what you're trying to say is that because we don't know how material life can form non-material life, it necessarily can't, and we're just going to go in a completely different direction with something that's completely, that's like saying, I don't know, like how, the cookie got disappeared. Was it like someone in my family? Was it an animal? I'm not saying we don't know how. I'm saying it's impossible when you live in a cause and effect universe. What I'm saying is
a cause and effect universe cannot add information. It's just cause and effect. You can't add information to the pool cue hitting the pool ball. It just is what it is.
You wouldn't apply the standard to anything else in your life. If there was a cookie that was in your house and the four of you guys in your whole family and all the animals and possibly have denied eating it, you don't just say, oh, someone in China must have come and stolen the cookie from me. You don't assume that, right? You can think of, sure, there's a possibility that something completely out of the box can happen, but the more realistic answer is that someone in your house ate the cookie and lied to you about it, right? The more realistic answer is that life came from non-life at some point. We just didn't see it.
No,
Would it be hard to see dirt becoming a bacteria?
Not in a cause and effect universe. Now you're not in a cause and effect universe. The norm is to stay with the information you have, not to invent new information out of whole cloth. You only have the universe. You only have the information that the universe provides. And the universe didn't start out with life. So there's no information about life there. So you're assuming in a cause and effect universe that somehow life comes from non-life when there's no information to do that.
We see information being created all the time, right?
Well, how does that happen in a cause and effect world? How does it happen in a cause and effect world?
What, of information being created? What are you defining? Again, information is also kind of vague, right? You can have complicated processes.
There's no life anywhere. It doesn't exist anywhere in the world. And all of a sudden, in a cause and effect world, it all of a sudden exists. But there's nothing there to cause it to exist, because everything there is non-life, and non-life always produces non-life. That's what we've always seen throughout the whole history of mankind. Non-life has always produced non-life.
Never seen anything. Can you admit that life produces non-life?
Well, we can. I don't know if we can create non-life or not. I've never thought about that.
No, humans can we can create things.
But an intelligent being can create, right? Usually we take the non-life and we organize it. I don't think
Sure.
we could, and we can kill a life, a body, and it can go to non-life.
If
But
we work,
we
if
don't- we
I'm
don't-
100 pounds, right, and I work, sorry, if I'm like 300 pounds and I work out and I become 250 pounds, I've lost 50 pounds of weight. That is part of my life going to non-life.
Right,
Right?
life
Or
can go to non-life, but we've never seen non-life go into life.
okay, so you agree that life can go to
Yeah.
non-life.
But anyhow, I think we're getting bogged down here. Unless you have something that's gonna get us out of this circle. We probably
No, I
should
mean
go on.
my only thing is that we both seem to agree that something mysterious had to happen that we are unsure about that created the first life.
Right.
The
So
question
if
is, did it come from something that also exists or something that just completely non-existent? Right?
Right,
So something is
so-
immaterial, it means it doesn't exist. Like, so it
No,
could be.
no, that's not the case. You talk to any philosopher or religious person or whomever deals with this sort of stuff, they won't say the immaterial is necessarily non-life, because the immaterial is oftentimes spoken about as a life. Yes, the life other
It's
than
spoken about
ours.
of life, but it's
So-
not
so
a
the-
life. It doesn't
so
take in
the- so the-
nutrients.
So the no, because it's a different type of life. So anyhow, I want to move on, but what it comes down to is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, either you believe that the evidence, we both agree that the evidence says life comes from life, intelligence comes from intelligence, self-awareness comes from intelligence, from self-awareness. Where did the first material life come from? You say it can come from non-material life. I say no, the evidence points to it coming from another life, another intelligence,
Material
another
non-life, I guess.
self-awareness. But it
Material
can't be,
non-life.
but it can't be a material one, because then it wouldn't be the first. And so we have this concept of the immaterial, which it naturally points to. So is that a correct summing up?
Yeah, just to be clear, what I have to believe, right, again, for my worldview to be consistent, is that a material life came from something else that was material, but it wasn't life, right?
Right.
Now, it could be a virus, which we all consider non-life, right? Viruses are not alive by all of the definitions, or most of the definitions of biology, right? But theoretically, if a virus evolved into a bacteria that takes in nutrients, it would meet the criteria for life. So I would personally say that something along those lines happened to create the first life.
Right.
That's
Right.
what I would say.
Yeah, you would have to say that, right? Okay, now this last one is the one you brought up, so you're gonna have to tell me what you think about this. Objective truth. All right,
Okay.
were you intending that you can or can't have objective truth if there's no God?
Okay, so what I'm saying is that whether there's a God or not, this is irrelevant whether there's a God or not. There is an objective truth. Now, the question is, are human beings capable of perceiving that objective truth in a, or are or is it like completely foreign to us, right? And I'm going to go back to the example I talked about earlier of Sam Richards, right? He claims that he knows the objective truth after, taking mushrooms, right? And I think all of us in the room can agree that if you're on mushrooms, what you're seeing isn't necessarily objectively true, right? That's just not like, that's probably, or it could be true, but it's most likely not true. It's almost certainly not true, right?
Actually, Sam Richards, in my debate with him, one of the debates with him, I don't remember him saying he got it from mushrooms. I remember him saying he got it from sex. That he was having sex with his wife.
No. To be
and had
clear,
some-
I remember this very clear. He said he first found out about God through experiencing mushrooms, but after that, once he knew that the gate was there, he could access it in many different ways. One of the ways he experienced God was from making love to his wife. That was what he said.
All right, go ahead.
But we can all agree that in certain situations, human beings are incapable of perceiving reality, right? Whether that's schizophrenia, whether that's mushrooms, I guess there's acid, there's all kinds of drugs nowadays. So what I personally believe about objective truth is I think that there is an objective truth, but human beings aren't a reliable source to necessarily say without a fraction of doubt that their perception of reality is necessarily reality.
So as an atheist, you would say we can't know anything for sure.
I would say that but first we have to say there is an objective truth, but I might not be perceiving it. That's what I would say.
Well, I thought you said that we were not capable of knowing, yes.
Knowing for sure what the objective truth is.
Yeah. So you would say that in a godless world, you can't know anything for sure.
I would say in any world, but yeah, particularly in a godless world, sure.
Well, in a God world, God can reveal to man, and he can say, "This is what I created," And the thing about God's character, at least from a Christian perspective, and the reason he has the ability to do this and objective morals and everything else, is his nature. So we say that he's the creator. That just gives him basic authority, doesn't mean much past that. He's omniscient, so he can't be wrong based on a lack of knowledge, which we can, obviously. He's perfect goodness, so he can't be wrong because he's led astray by a less than perfect motive.
Sure.
And he's perfect love, so he always has to have our highest good in mind.
Sure.
So those four basic qualities, omniscience, our creator, omniscience, perfect goodness, and perfect love, give him, it means he can't be wrong, not only when he tells us about objective morality, when he tells us about the objective world. He can't be wrong, and it has to be to our high, whatever he says to us has to be to our highest good. So God can reveal these things to us, and we can trust him, and then we can say, oh, I'm seeing a tree. Is that really a tree? Well, God said he created trees. This is how he created trees, and whatever. So we can know that that's a tree. But what you're saying is, from an atheistic perspective, that might not be a tree. That could be something else. So what you're saying is, from a godless world, we really can't know anything for sure, which means from a godless world, we're basically ignorant.
Yeah, what I would say is
of reality. We don't know that we don't know that we're
when you
so
look
when you
at
were
a
talking
tree,
about when you were talking about that neutrino and how we can know what the neutrino is made of, what you're really saying is we don't really know what it's made of because we don't know we're perceiving it accurately. When you come to the conclusion that life comes from non-life, you're saying, well, I don't know that for sure because I don't even know that there's such a thing as non-life or life, right?
So we have to be first be careful when we talk about semantics, right? That's why it's important to give things very clear definitions. Right? These are words, right? Words have a certain they're symbolic of. Again, I sound way too much like Matt Walsh right now, but that's what he likes to say, right? The words are symbols of.
He was a pretty good Christian, so.
I'm sure you definitely disagree with him on all the science stuff, though, right?
I might. Huh? I haven't heard him, so I haven't heard him. So
he has a whole video. Just I don't know. I consider it a debunking of young Earth creationism, but you're welcome to check out his video and decide for yourself. I recommend it. Actually, I was going to suggest you guys do a video on that. But what I was going to say is that words have specific meanings. So there's two things. Is one is like a triangle has three sides. If that I can be 100% certain of that because I'm the one defining the word triangle and defining the word three and defining the word side. So that's an axiom.
Wait, but you didn't define it. Somebody else defined it, right?
Sure.
And you're agreeing with their definition.
Yes.
If you can't be sure, if you can't be sure of anything that's objective, you can't be sure that that's really a triangle, right? You can't be sure you're perceiving.
I can't be sure if what I'm seeing is a triangle, but I can say a triangle has three sides.
Well, then you can know objective truth.
What?
Then you're saying you can know objective truth.
I can't. I said I can't. I said I can't know for sure that this is really a triangle.
Okay.
What I can say though, and this is what I'm talking about with objective truth, I can say that a triangle has three sides, and I can know that for certain based on because that's the way I'm defining it. That's an axiom, right?
But you're not even sure if there is a triangle. So if there is a triangle,
then it might not be a triangle, right?
And if there is one, maybe we're defining it wrong.
No, but I'm saying
6 sides.
I'm saying the way
10 sides, 20 sides.
I'm defining a triangle, right? Maybe I can't see that this is a triangle. If I'm saying a triangle has three sides, I'm giving a definition, right? That can't be wrong because that's my definition of the word triangle.
Well, it can be wrong objectively.
It might. No, definitions can't be objectively wrong. It's your definition, right? Now you can say it's subjective. Yeah, of course.
So you're subjective.
You're right.
Okay. So you're subjectively.
It's a subjective definition, I guess. Yes.
Right. Objectively, you can be wrong. Subjectively, you can say you're right, but objectively,
a definition can't be objectively wrong because it's your definition, right? Now you can say it's inconsistent with other people's definition. You're allowed to say that. I think that's fine, right? You can say objective.
Okay. Objective is something that's right for everybody at all times, whether they think it's true or not. So what you're saying is you can subjectively define a triangle as three sides. That can be true for you. It's not, but it's not true. It's not objectively true because it's not necessarily true for anybody else.
Correct. Because how I define triangle might be different than the way you define triangle, right?
Right. So what you're saying is in a godless world, you can't know anything for sure.
For example, a triangle has three sides. Again, as Matt Walsh would say, like the concept of a triangle is not the same as the symbol of the word triangle, right? Like there are things, there could, even if there aren't, there could be things that exist that have three sides. That's allowed.
But you don't know that though.
What? You don't know if they
But
exist, but you know that they could,
okay, so the difference between that and a God world is that because God can reveal that he's created triangles and squares, and he can, I mean, we're gonna put different words on it, but we can say that this thing we call
Exactly.
square has four sides and so on. And because of those qualities we just elucidated, he can't be wrong and he can't deceive us, right? So we can be sure. I would say that once again, in the real world, we are sure that there's a triangle. In the real world, we are sure that Kunal exists, right? We are, because he is truth, and truth cannot deceive. So remember, God is that which there can be no greater. A lie is an obfuscation of the truth. It doesn't have an existence on its own, right? So I would say in the real world, we do know. I do know you exist. I do know we're doing this podcast. I do know the triangle exists. I do know these books in front of me exist, and these icons in front of me exist. And that's inconsistent with there not being a God. So I would say, once again, our experience in the world points to there being a God, because you might philosophically say, because you're an atheist, that you can't know a triangle exists, but you in reality know a triangle exists, right? That's the reality of your life. But you can't say that because you would be admitting that there's a God.
So if you're saying that God has the ability to never lie and tell the truth, right? You agree that schizophrenia exists, right? And you agree even more commonly, right, that mushrooms exist and they give you a distorted sense of truth, right? I've never done mushrooms. Can you attest to that?
I would say that if you're doing mushrooms, you should never believe anything you're experiencing is real. If you want to stay sane.
That was my favorite line that you said to Sam in your debate, right? You said, at least I knew not to believe what I saw, right? But you agree that when you do mushrooms, that what you see is not reality. Right?
It doesn't.
Is that not the same as a lie? If God, God could tell you the truth.
God didn't tell me to take the mushrooms, and God doesn't take mushrooms.
God created the mushrooms.
I'm saying, well, it didn't necessarily. God created a lot of things we're not supposed to eat, right? So he created arsenic. That doesn't mean we should go out and ingest it. But and if you're going to ingest a foreign substance, you should know what it does to you, and you should really recognize it can screw with your mind, and maybe you shouldn't take it. But God, who is truth, we say God can do anything other than deny his nature, and whatever comes along with that, like how he created things to be. But in his nature or part of his nature is truth. Right? God's not broken. We're broken. Truth is the thing that actually exists. The lie doesn't actually exist in the sense that it doesn't have a positive existence of its own. It's the screwing with the truth. It's the messing with the truth, right? So evil doesn't have a positive existence on its own. It's always the breakdown of the good, or the messing with the good. So God's not broken. God is the good. So he can't lie. He can't do evil. That goes against his nature. We, because we're fallen, we can do the evil. We can do the lie. But again, this objective truth comes down to is what's our common human experience? Our common human experience is, I know this is a book, right? There's no possible way that it's not a book.
If you were on mushrooms, wouldn't you not be sure?
Well, that's because I've taken something which I might not be sure of, but it's still a book. It's still a book, whether I'm sure of it or not.
That's what I agree with that. I agree with that last part.
But if I mess with my mind and I don't know what's real or not real, that's other than me being in my right mind, which most people are most of the time. And most people are going to say, well, they're not in their right mind, right? They're hearing voices, right? And so that can mess with the reality. But just because, again, the exception doesn't prove, exception proves the rule. Exception doesn't discount the rule, right? So the rule is we know that we're talking to each other right now. That's reality. That's objective reality. The only way that we can know that for 100% surety is if there's a God. The reality is we do know that. An atheist can't admit that because then he's admitting that there's a God. But you act as if that exists. When you're walking down the pavement, you don't think at any point in time it can turn to spaghetti. You know the next step, it's going to be a pavement because you know that it exists. You don't live as if there's a God. You don't live as if there's no God. You live as if there's a God, time and time and time again.
What I think what you're saying is that sorry, 1 second, I lost my train of thought.
It's worse when you get older.
No, what you're saying is that, schizophrenics and people on mushrooms, they don't perceive reality, right?
They're
We're
the
assuming
exception, right?
we could
They're the
all be on
exception.
schizophrenics. We could all be real. Like, how are you to know that all of us
You
are
have
not schizophrenics, and schizophrenics are actually the ones that are perceiving reality? How do you know
you
that we're all like not, hallucinating, and people on mushrooms are the ones who are seeing reality? Like, how can you
you
tell?
can't know that. You can't
Yeah.
know that
Yeah.
because you don't have an overriding God who can tell you what reality is. So
Yeah.
you, as the atheist, philosophically can't know that. The
Yeah.
reality is you do know that. The reality is the
Yeah.
schizophrenic isn't saying things correctly. The reality is the person on mushrooms isn't saying things correctly. That's real life, what you really think, what you really believe, what
Yeah.
you really know, because you're not insane. But you can't make that consistent with your atheistic worldview. So you
Yeah.
have to say, well, you don't really know it, but you really do know it.
Well,
Just like you
again,
have to say, raping the 2-year-old and sending its body parts across the world isn't necessarily wrong, even though you know it's necessarily wrong.
yeah.
You have to
Well,
say that life doesn't have meaning, even though you know that it has to have meaning for
well,
you to exist in some sort of sane state.
well, again, like as Sam said, like Sam Richard said, he said he took mushrooms and then he experienced God, right? That was
No,
his,
he
again, his
experienced
words.
mushrooms.
What?
Experienced
I would agree with that,
mushrooms.
right? Right, but it's
Right.
like
But
for
so
him, it's
Sam Richard is not an authority for either one of us, right? He had his experience, and I would say to Sam, you should have a different experience of God other than when you're on mushrooms. Maybe God broke through to him on mushrooms. I don't know. I wasn't there. But I would say to Sam, you probably shouldn't trust that experience. You should probably seek out God outside of that. So,
okay. Anyway, I think I think that was
all right, good
discussion.
debate.
But I think I just, let me just before I finish, I was going to say the problem that I have with objective truth is that where I think I start to disagree with other people, especially other atheists, is that when they say that is the idea that like because we sometimes have trouble perceiving the truth, right? But for the most part, we can all agree that what we see is reality, right? We're not necessarily denying, like most of the disagreements about reality are not coming from like, oh, I'm seeing something and you're seeing, like I'm seeing a triangle and you're seeing a square. It's not coming from that, right? Most of our disagreements about reality are coming from us interpreting situations differently. So in that situation, we can say, all right, let's assume that all of our senses are correct and accurate. Once we do that, then we can sort of have an objective truth, right? Assuming our senses are correct. And I think part of the
problem is in
problem
a cause and effect universe, you can't assume that.
You can't assume it. No. But I'm saying if we agree on what we perceive, right, then all that's left is for us to have the interpretation. But that is objective, right? Once we assume our senses are correct, which again I agree is an assumption we can't make, but we can say this is what we both see. Now discuss reality. We should be able to, from all of those assumptions, be able to come up with a reality we agree on. But instead, people have gone in the opposite direction and said, this is my truth, or this is your truth, or whatever. And it's not coming from me seeing a triangle and you seeing a square. In fact, often it's coming from people seeing reality and then just denying it and saying, I want to believe.
Right. I would say again, this is why these debates last forever, because each one says something, the other one wants to respond to it. So we'll have to cut it off at some point. I would say, yes, if we agree that the tree is the tree, right? And the man's the man and the woman's the woman. If we agree to all of that, the computer's the computer, then we can proceed from there. But I think what you would agree with is that in a cause and effect godless universe, you may be agreeing on it, but you don't know that it's true.
Sure, that's
what I'm saying is, in reality, in real life, we do know that it's true.
Yeah.
And that's only consistent with a God universe and not inconsistent with a godless universe. So I think that's, again, where we disagree.
What I'm saying is, for the triangle point, right? If I said, okay, if we assume that what we're seeing is a triangle, right? We both agree to that, right? This is a triangle, we're not seeing it differently. And
we agree. If we both agree that it's a triangle, then we agree that we can proceed from there.
And I can, but let's say the situation, right? I say that the sum of the angles in this triangle are 180 degrees, and you say no, they're not. That my truth says that they're 200 degrees, right? That's not me and you disagreeing about reality. That's us saying this is a triangle, and you analyzing the situation objectively incorrectly. Does that make sense?
No. The reason it doesn't make sense is that until you can say that that triangle objectively exists, and we can observe it objectively, know that it objectively exists, and know objectively what the sum of the angles are, then you're just saying, well, we're just agreeing on it, but we don't know that it exists.
Yeah, we can agree on the properties.
What we're saying is that that's not real life. In real life, we're not just agreeing that that's a triangle with certain angles. We know it's a triangle with certain angles. It's just that in an atheistic world, in a godless world, you can't admit that obvious reality of life.
Yeah.
You have to put it in the context of what you believe.
Yeah.
We don't have to do that. We can just say, we perceive it as a triangle. It's a triangle. Everybody knows it's a triangle.
Yeah.
And we know it because God has revealed to us that the world is real and we're perceiving it correctly. Right. So,
okay, I guess here's a better example. Let's say that we're both on mushrooms and we see an actual square. Let's say Matthew sees a square, but we're both on mushrooms, right? And we both see it as a triangle, right? Even if it's not true, it could be completely false. It would still stand that the triangle that we see has the sum of the angles being 180 degrees, right? Now, the fact that it's a triangle is wrong, but the fact that if it's a triangle, if we assume that it's a triangle, the sum of the angles would be 180 degrees, correct?
Well, if there was actually, I mean, look, if there was actually a triangle there, but you're saying there's no triangle there, you're just saying we're agreeing on it. What I'm saying is that in the real world in which we all live, not in the mushroom world, which I live from time to time, that the triangle actually does exist. It is objective, and we know it's there. We know it's objective. That's the world in which everybody lives.
Yeah.
It's just that world can only be affirmed by those who believe in at least the Christian God. I don't know about every God. It can't be affirmed. The real world can't be affirmed by the atheist. The atheist has to say, well, we only have to agree that that exists. We can't know for sure that it exists. I'm saying that's not the real world. And that's what we're saying with every one of these things. That, the way the real world is points to God. And then the atheist has to say, well, yeah, but. Well, we don't have to say, yeah, but. We can just say, this is the real world. This is how man always acts and always has acted and always has believed. And therefore that points to God. You have to say, yes, this is how man has always acted and always believed, but man has been wrong. Man has been deceived. There isn't really a God.
So I have one final question for you.
Yeah.
So, yeah. We'll be
sure?
Closing after this, but I am, so you've said that Sam Richards, he shouldn't trust his experience on mushrooms. He should see what it's like afterwards, right? But we know between mushrooms and acid and all of the other possible, hallucinogens, drugs, right? Of course it's bad when you trip, right? But a lot of those have lingering effects much, much, much later after the trip is over, right? They don't go away. They infect your brain, right? Would you agree with that? Yeah,
I would say the problem with them is not necessarily that you're going to have a bad trip, because, a lot of people don't have bad trips. A lot of people have fun. That's why they keep doing it. The problem is the after effects.
Yeah. So would you agree that if that's the case, that you might, if all experiences after the mushrooms you take the first time might not be completely accurate, because they might just be the mushrooms giving you some kind of hallucinogen effect?
I mean, that is a possibility. The other possibility is that they are correct. What we're saying here is not, I'm not pointing to myself and saying, you should take my word on anything. What we've done here is we've just looked at common human experience, mushrooms aside, and say these common human experiences point to God. Yeah. Right. And you would say, yes, you would kind of say that, well, you would say whatever you say, but you wouldn't necessarily disagree that they do. You would just say that we're not perceiving them correctly. So I would say we are perceiving them correctly. But anyhow, we can't go on and on forever. If you agree with that summation, we should probably call it a night.
Thank you guys again for giving me the chance to be in your podcast.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun. It reminds me of the old days. Days they don't have much anymore.
I haven't debated religion in so long. I honestly recently people nowadays just want to debate politics. So I have to, start debating politics now. That's not as much fun,
Well, on campus these days, they don't want to debate anything. Believe it or not, it's been a long, I guess 2 years ago, like I said, we had 2 atheists that were around most of the year. Yeah. And the other one came about a little bit into next year. Other than that, I hardly get a chance to debate religion anymore. And we bring up these topics, and I say to Matt, I got to go back and figure out what I used to think about this, because I haven't debated this in so long that I got to make sure I still remember all this stuff, because they don't want to debate anymore, because they don't have any ground to debate. Like when you were there, most people still had some sort of Christian sense of things, so we could have a middle ground, right? No, they don't have that anymore, so there's no middle ground. So it's, well, we can't really know anything, so I just asked this guy what he thinks about this just for fun and see what he thinks. Maybe I'll like it, and maybe I won't.
I'm gonna send you the link. This was the video that, I don't know if you saw it, but this is Matt Walsh's video, and he talks about young Earth creationism. And again, as an atheist, of course, for me, this is like, a very coherent and logical and objective just debunking of a lot of the religious points.
So how long is this video?
It's a 40-minute video. Don't watch it now. But I'm saying at some point, if you guys should do a podcast just analyzing it, I think that'd be interesting.
Yeah, that might be a good idea. Do you got that, Micah? Do you got that, Matt?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, that'd be a great idea, Kunal, because yeah, I mean, that's one of these topics that we could have a lot to say. But it's also kind of an interesting thing too, because just like in you talking with Gary, as Orthodox people, we're trying to express a view of the world, and you as a scientific atheist might say, well, won't you agree that animals act this way? I mean, we might say, yeah, after the fall. Or wouldn't you agree that nature behaves this way? We might say, yeah, after the fall. So there's an entire different kind of layer that belongs to all this. That could be a lot of fun to investigate.
Yeah. I really like Matt Walsh's video, but again, he goes very hard against, creationism and stuff like that. So it'd be interesting to.
We broke down Matt Walsh's debate with Joe Rogan. And we didn't think that Matt did the greatest job in the world, because he was trying to argue God without bringing in God. So in other words, he was trying to show that his, I think he's Roman Catholic, but his Christian Catholic beliefs were true about marriage and so on, without bringing God into it. So he's playing on a playing field which he can't win, because the secular playing field has no rules. But you can say anything you want, because there's no objective necessities of truth or whatever. So if you're going to, for me, if I'm going to debate somebody who's atheist, I can't leave God at the door, because I'm on a playing field that I can't possibly win, because there's no rules.
I'll give you credit too, but a lot of your critiques of Matt Walsh are like, that's the things I like about him, right? That he's able to argue in a secular way. But you've done that too. I remember in your debate with Sam Richard, you talked about, homosexuality, right? And you didn't use religion at all to argue your point, right?
Well, yeah, you can do that, especially if you have some sort of common ground, and you can do that to a point. Yeah. But there's a point where you have to say you can't go past a certain point with that. Okay. So yeah, I did that all the time. I try to argue these things without bringing God into it. So I think they can be argued on that level, but only to a degree. Yeah. And then at some point, you're going to have to bring God into it, or you're going to, people aren't going to know your presuppositions. Yeah. And if you're not bringing God into it, like we try to say, nothing's ultimately wrong. Yeah. So why is homosexuality wrong? Yeah. If sex purpose isn't to create life, and if it's just to have fun with, and it can't, then so you have to say, you have to bring God in at some point. Oh, okay. I see what you mean.
Yeah, I also like a lot of Matt Walsh's stuff. I like his documentary and everything. I get the impression that you like his way of arguing as well. Yeah. When he started talking about young Earth creationism, do you have the sense that he, as a Catholic, sort of has an evolutionary framework?
So just to be clear, I like Matt Walsh. I don't always agree with Matt Walsh. It's not like I'm sure. I'm somebody who just listens to him all the time. I often disagree with him. So, when the way he talked about that video is, it was almost more of a rejection of some of the claims made. Like what he's saying is that, his biggest point is that, to accept the tenets of young Earth creationism, you have to reject entire fields of science. And he's like, which people like live by, right? people might say they don't believe in the theory of relativity, but all of their GPSs are built on it, and they go by it, right? So what he'll say is, he's like, he'll say, do you think Ken Ham has a better knowledge of the universe than Albert Einstein? Like, really? About like astronomy? And he said, yeah, you have to assume that like archaeology, anthropology, physics, biology, math, all of those fields are just completely wrong. Or is it possible that maybe you interpreted the Bible incorrectly? He won't say the Bible is wrong. He'll say you're interpreting it incorrectly. So I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I think in general, without getting into a debate, another debate that's going to go for 3 hours. I would think in general, we would say it's one thing when the scientists are looking at the world the way it is, and drawing conclusions based on the way it is, and then projecting back to a time when nobody was there to see it, except for God, of course, and somehow knowing what happened and assuming everything happened naturally before they even look. And then they're taking everything and they're putting it into this assumption that they don't know to be true. So if I were to do that, if I were to assume that God created and fit all the evidence into that without even looking into naturalism, people would say, "Oh, you're leaving out half the possibilities. That's not real science." Well, if you leave out the possibility of an intelligent creator, you're also leaving out half the possibilities. And so that's not real science either. So anyhow, that could go on forever. We don't really have time. We got to end this at some point. But we'll look at that and we'll break it down, hopefully. And we'll see how it goes.
Okay, actually, I'm interested. I'm going to check out the Joe Rogan podcast now.
Let us know what you think.
All right, sounds good. Thanks again for having me on. I really appreciate it.
All right, thanks for coming. It was a great debate.
Thank you so much, Kunal. Yeah, you did a great job.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.